Hey kids, welcome to Glenn's Drum Emporium. What are we doing today? We are working on this beautiful late 60s tempo drum set, and we ran into a snag where this drum here, it's the only drum, is missing two tension rods. This is the tension rod. There's on this particular one, there's 8 per side to hold the rim over the skin, and this is what you use to tighten the skin and tune it. These rods right here. And for you non-drummers, this is a drum key. Goes on the head like this, and you turn it to tune the drum. Normally the head is square on here. They vary in sizes and designs. Like this one here from Sonar or Sonar is, and Premier too, I think early Premiers were slotted like a standard screwdriver slot. I don't know if you can see that. Trying to get it probably like this. And in that case, the key, instead of having the square embedded in there, would be round with a slot across it. And you put it on and just get it in the slot, and away you go. So anyways, as many drummers have found out who fix their own drums, tension rods, this is the tension rod. Right? Turns it into a receiving nut, or tension rod receiving nut. That can be anything in designs. They varied so much over the years. I'll give you a little a show of what they've kind of gone through. In the early days, a lot of the drums had these. These are brass lugs, threaded with the tuning tension rod right here, going straight in. Where I love this design, the disadvantage of this design is if you don't drill the hole straight in the shell, the tension rod won't go in, because these holes on the rims are spaced with a little bit of forgiveness, but if you goof it up, you won't get the tension rod in. There's no variable. These thread directly in. There's no play left or right in the rod itself. So that technology changed, but is still around, because they're basically a low mass lug. You can see just a couple of spots where the lug is touching the shell, so the shell reverberates more. That's what you kind of want. Anyways, this is a drum I built years ago. My company, Gecko, which is a small little company in my hometown. That's all I did it for. So that's the early type. So the disadvantages, like I say, is there's no play, so it has to go straight in. And the other thing is, if you strip the threads in it, you have to change the whole lug. Whereas technology change, this is one technology. I'm going to try and get some light on here, just so we can see. Okay, you can see this is the lug, and they make them look pretty and long. And this whole area in here is wasted space. The only important part is right in here, this slot. And what goes in there is a tension rod insert, right? And it's got a threaded hole in it. So this type would go, oops, not like that, goes into this area. It just goes right in here and sits in that groove. And then you can see it, the threaded hole through here. Now the advantage of this type, okay, this one's not going to fit. Is it's got play. So if you're a little bit off on the lug hole when you're drilling the shell, it gives a little bit of forgiveness. If the rim is not totally centered on the head, you have that much play. And you can still tune the drum and it'll still work fine. Okay? The problem with this type is putting it together, this stupid thing is flopping around. It doesn't lock in there. It just falls out. The problem is it makes noise. It rattles. You can actually hear this moving around if you've got low tension, or if a drum lug tension rod is kind of loose, it will vibrate in there. Every time you hit the drum, it'll vibrate. So that gets on recordings. It's very annoying. So there's some other issues with this. I'll come back to this. So anyways, that's one type. I never liked this type, and a lot of the vintage drums that I collect use that type, and I'll tell you what the pain is in a minute. So then they went to this design. With a retainer spring and this tension rod nut. So what happens is the spring holds it in place right here. And you can see now the retaining nut is now able to move up and down and a bit to the side. Right here, it's able to move to the side. You don't cross thread it because the nut will adjust to. Actually, I got to use this type. So you've got the play, but you can also push in. You can do, so you've got even more motion. The spring locks it in place, and it's fairly easy to work on the drums if you take the lug off. The problem with this is the spring vibrates, makes an overtone. If you ever take your, I've done videos on this already, if you take your drum apart, just tap either the shell or the spring. Like I'm going like this right now, and I can feel the spring vibrating. And it's got a slight noise to it. So what we do with this type is put a cotton batten ball. You take the spring out, put the cotton ball in, and then put the spring back in. Did I say that right? Take the spring out, cotton ball in, and then spring over top. And what that does is stops that from vibrating. So these lugs and design are still great. They're on most vintage drums, especially in the 60s and 70s. This is where they really started to use them quite a bit. To eliminate the spring issue, we went to this design, which is almost the same as this, only instead of that being a threaded tension rod insert like this, this is a kind of a flexible plastic rubber, just a locking piece. I don't know what the correct name for is. It retainer, I guess. So when you take it out, the tension rod comes out. The tension rod retaining nut comes out. You see the slot? So you put the retaining nut in first. You can see the hole where it goes in. And it's got this particular retaining nut is 6 corner, but the flat sides fit in a flat side inside the lug design. I don't know if you can see that. I hope so. So it won't spin in there, but it will fall out if you don't put the retainer in. So the retainer now, the only function it serves is to lock the tension rod nut in place. So it still moves around. Still moves around. It won't go in, but it's free to move, and there's no noise. Basically a noiseless lug, so you don't have any interference. I'm still more partial to the spring ones, but this is the norm these days. Okay, so the problem, I've seen this many times because I've bought so many old vintage drum sets. People don't understand that these tension rods throughout the decades are not all the same. So what they'll try and do is, whatever drum set, whether it be this type right here, the middle type I showed you, or the newer style, they will try and thread whatever tension rod they have in their hands, if they're missing one, and try and thread this in. And as you can tell, this won't go. So what people don't understand, or what drummers don't understand, is the thread design on many of the tension rods is totally different. Like take these two, for instance. This has more thread per measurement than this. This one has a bigger diameter. But they still try and thread this into a smaller hole that this goes in. And so they screw up all the threads. I don't know if you can see that. Hopefully you can. So fine thread, this is a bit wider thread. Now the other problem is drums were made in different countries. A lot of drums came from Japan. I love to collect vintage 50s, 60s, and 70s made in Japan drums. But their thread designs weren't even consistent with their own brands. They were different between brands. So you have to stockpile a lot of these tension rods and know what you're looking for. So I came across that with this drum set that I just bought. This is a 1960s, late 60s tempo kit. I was missing 2 of the tension rods, and I have stockpiles of tension rods. Believe me, I have tons. This particular drum has a rare, small diameter, very fine thread tension rod. Thankfully, I had like about 12 of them. I have to use 2, but that's all I have. I keep searching for them, but they are rare. Now, there is a way around it. You can change, this is the bonus, you can change this tension rod retaining nut to different thread patterns, as long as the backside fits into the lug itself and fits between the locking braces in there so it doesn't spin. You can do that, but it is tricky because tension rod retaining nuts are also different. The flange might be longer. Like here's, it looks like a nut right here with the 6 corners. this flange, this length of flange varies on different ones, different companies. Here's one that's square. And again, thread is different. Metric, standard, imperial, all this fun stuff. Then you have this type, which is short and only partial. And I believe this is Sonar or Premier. And I have tons of these. So that's the scoop when you're doing this. Understand the threads are different. They're physically easy to tell. I mean, it's physically easy to tell the thread is different. Like you can see that how much fatter this is compared to this. Now, on occasion, you can retap some threads to make tension rods. And what I do is I collect a bunch of these long ones. These are for varied drums, could be marching drums or whatever. So what I do is I have a tap and die set. Tap and die is for making threads. You can make threads on the outside diameter of this area right here, or you can retap threads on the inside. So you have it inside and outside. Okay, so tap and die. One has a function for each. So what I'll do is, say I couldn't find these. Say I didn't have any in my stash. I'd find a long one with just a big flange like this. I would cut off the threads because these threads don't work for my situation. These are a little more coarser thread where this is fine. It's not going to thread into the retainer at all, so I'm going to make my own. So I cut it off here and I rethread it to match the 1 inch or 1 1/4 inch of thread pattern of the existing lugs on that drum. So if I couldn't have found one, I would have made one out of this. That would have been slightly different, but that way I can at least maintain somewhat the original lug design, which is what is most important to me. Tension rods, I mean, some collectors are anal about the tension rods being the same. I can understand that for vintage Rogers and Ludwig kits. But as you can see, this is more blunt, squarish, and taller. Maybe not taller, but it's definitely sharper edge. Whereas this one's, where this one's smoother, almost looks like a witch's hat flanging down. So I'm not quite sure why this design, but I would imagine it's so the key doesn't buckle up on here, because sometimes it might get stuck on there. But I prefer the old ones. You get more bite. These ones I find they slip off. They don't strip, but if you're threading it on with your finger, trying to do it quick, and when you first install it, and you just want to get down to the bottom before it starts adding tension, before you get to tension, if you're spinning it with the key, then the key flies off. But on these ones, it doesn't. You can spin it really quick and get it on there. But not sure why the design changed, but it is what it is. So that's the scoop. You got to understand, especially when you have these old Stewart coronets. This was mainly Stewart, although these lugs have bounced around from different companies. The thread in here, you can retap that thread. Obviously, you cannot retap it to a smaller hole and thread design. It has to be the same size to retap it or bigger. Otherwise it won't work. This is a different type. This is really thick. I forgot what drum I got this. Thicker the better, because you have more thread. If you're like me and crank the snare drum pretty tight, you want more thread. So a lot of these cheaper drum ones are prone to stripping because they're so thin. So what I've done actually, and sometimes, is if I've wrecked the threads, I re-drill another hole right next to it and just shave it to a point like this, retap it, flip it over, put it in, and it works fine. Because these are rare, very rare. If you lose them, good luck in finding one. You can make them out of, you know, flat steel, but man, that's a lot of work. So that's the scoop. Don't wreck the threads on your tension rods. Don't wreck the threads on the tension rod receiving nut or retaining nut. Quite annoying, especially for me when I'm restoring them, because they do get buggered up. So this one threads in nicely. This is a, like I say, it's a fine thread, vintage. Don't see these much anymore. Probably early 70s you'll see them, and that's it. These old ones here, the threads are really coarse. No, that's not the right type either. I don't even have one handy, I don't think. Let's see here. Yeah, I don't know if that's the right one either. Like I said, there's so many types. Yeah, see, when it won't go in, it's the wrong thread. And people wonder why, oh, it must be just something on the threads. No, you're screwing up the threads. Very coarse thread in these. Let's see if it works on this one. Yeah. So Stewart, this one fits Stewart. This one won't fit anything else. So that's actually a Stewart one. And those are getting hard to find. So if you're restoring a Stewart kit, and there you go. It threads in beautifully. If you're restoring a Stewart kit and you can't find these inserts, all is not lost. You can make them. You just get some bar flat steel, and I've done it. It's time consuming, but cut little rectangles and then drill them and tap them with threads, and you're fine. It's not fun, but you can do it. And these type, they're interchangeable to some extent, but some companies change the width of these to suit their lug design, so it's a gamble, a crapshoot. I have changed them in some lugs and put modern tension rods in, and it works fantastic. Trying to put a giant threaded tension rod into the smaller retainer, it's just going to wreck it, and then you'll never get it out. You'll end up wrecking the lug, because after you get it jammed in there, then you risk stripping this, spinning around in the lug and breaking all the main support in the lug, and I've seen that too. Anyways, that's the scoop. This is a beautiful drum set. I'm almost done. Just got to do the bass drum next. I've got to clean the one head for this, and then it's even got an original head. Like, I love it. Right here. Look at that. Original. Gotta love that. Anyways, thanks for watching.